Thank you so much for joining us on the last day of the conference. Congratulations on making it this far. It's a long 2.5 days. I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement that we are all on the Tiohtià:ke, also known as Montreal, situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations, including the Kanien'kehá:ka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabeg. We recognize and respect the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet. Today is also home of many Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Thank you for joining us for WGH6, Queering Housing Justice, 2SLGBTQIA plus Research, Healing, and Co-Creation. My name is Stefania. I'm with the Women's National Housing and Homelessness Network. We're in charge of putting together the Women and Gender Homelessness Stream, and we had a lot of incredible proposals come forward. So we really appreciate all of the presenters who are making this stream so excellent and wonderful to participate in, and for all of you for showing that there is not only a need, but a great interest in participation in furthering gender housing justice. So I'm going to hand it over to our presenters. Thank you all so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Levi Foy, and I am one of the presenters this morning from Sunshine House. And this morning, I will be talking a little bit about the co-creation aspect of kind of this stream. I'm originally from Couchiching First Nation, which is located on the border of Ontario and Minnesota, and I have been living and working in Winnipeg for 11 years. And my co-presenter over here, Helena, will introduce himself when they come up. So the objectives of this workshop is to gain insight into the impacts of housing insecurity from Black and Indigenous 2SLGBTQIA plus community organizers, conceptualize frameworks for peer-led housing and support services in their communities, and apply practical strategies to strengthen advocacy and social supports. So this is really a narrative, and I'm going to plow through a bunch of stuff here this morning, like just plow through it. However, everyone who with the exception of one person who built this presentation with us, is all sitting at this front table, and they'll all be available to ask questions or talk to after the presentation if you have anything specifically. And I'm going to focus on the really boring stuff around policy and organizational growth. Thanks. So Sunshine House, in a nutshell, is we've been providing over 30 years of service, specifically around harm reduction, safety, respect, and inclusion. Those are our central tenets. We work with community, we're a place where people can grow. We work with community members to develop innovative programs that fill gaps in the social service sector. And we really follow two kinds of models here. Recreation is a form of prevention, so give people something to do. They're not going to be, they might make better choices, or they might make more healthier choices, or whatever that might mean. And then the Auntie's House. And so the Auntie's House is to develop everything from the central relationship that you make within program delivery that feels like an auntie's house. So there's not a lot of rules. There's always peers around. You don't know who's working there, and you actually don't understand what the structure is, but it just works. Who we are today. So as an organization, we've always, we grow and we change and we kind of respond to things. So we're not like a core agency in Winnipeg. We don't really, our mandate is really loose and flexible. It's really chaotic, and that's by design. So today we operate a number of different programs that we'll speak about at different lengths through this presentation. We have our drop-in and like that programs. These are the central ways that we develop relationships with individuals, and then from there we grow out. And we also, within that program, we have the 2S trans non-binary ID support program, so providing people access to resources to get name changes and that kind of stuff done. We have Zagituwad, which is focused on housing, specifically 2SLGBTQIA plus housing supports and services, when it has housing loss prevention, shelter diversion, and housing specific supports. Gisha-Winneman, which is sexual health, refugee claimant support, Kelly's Corner, which is a residential facility, and we operate the only overdose prevention site in the province of Manitoba. And then within that, we also have developed a peer support program. So through all of these programs, in the first 9 months of this year, we've had 111,000 visits to our programs and services. And within our drop-in program, we've had 14 incidences of violence, and we've responded to 11 overdoses within our drop-in programs, and those operate 5 days a week. And so those numbers are really, really exceptional in terms of this, and I don't have a reason why. And the actual reason why is probably the way that we've developed our programs. In addition to these programs, we also have a cultural team that's embedded in all of our programs, and then pictures, nice pictures you can see. I started as the executive director in March of 2019, and I was the only full-time staff. Through COVID-19, we were one of the only drop-in spaces that stayed open. Feather, who's sitting up here, she was running our drop-in programs, and we had a call from a funder, and they said, we have some dollars for you to respond to COVID. What do you want to do with it? So Feather and I went downstairs, talked to the participants that were there. They said, just stay open. That was their mandate, just stay open. So that's all we did, and because we were one of the only agencies that stayed open, people just threw money at us, and we were like, okay, let's just try this, and let's try this, and try this, and so we were literally just throwing shit at the walls, and whatever would stick, that's what we did. As of today, we have 93 staff, 63 of them are full-time. 2/3 of those staff were people who were participants before, and that includes our directors and our leadership. And we have very high rates of success across programs. So for example, in our Zagitawad program, the housing programs, where we placed in the last year, we've placed 43 people in housing placements, and only one of those has resulted in a housing breakdown in that entire year. We have low attrition rates, so we have a turnover rate of about less than 10% of employees who leave the organization for other opportunities. We have pretty low rates of sick calls, and we've done a lot of things to kind of mitigate these things. We have constant feedback and community engagement, so we've restructured the whole shape of the organization. So rather than having a typical board of directors, we also have a community advisory circle, and each one of the senior leaders have to answer to one of the governing bodies in different ways. And then the board of directors can only handle legal and fiscal liability, and then the community advisory circles manage all programming and operations. So then we have a complete separation. And then the staff, I answer to both of those boards. And then we have other senior leaders who answer to each one of those respective boards. So through that giant change and that 5 years of constant flux and developing a relationship with chaos, we've kind of come to, these were some of the challenges and the adaptations that we've made as an organization. And being really, really intentional. So this is my thing. So if you have any questions about any of these specifics, I'm happy to do it afterwards. But I just want to make sure that we have enough time to capture all of the things. Oh yeah, and I don't know where my timer is. Damn it. Okay, thanks. Actually, I'm going to be good. This is fine. I think I'm on course. So as I mentioned, we did a lot of, we focused a lot on governance changes. So we really wanted to go from an organization that was, open for maybe 9 hours a week to operating services 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Your policies, the policies were weak, and as you kind of move, you learn that you have to really you have to really develop policies that make sense. But what we found is that all of the policies that many of us, when we're developing policies in our organizations, oftentimes what we'll do is we'll just borrow from what's available on Google and just modify it and do that. And that's that's kind of how we develop policies. And so if you look at our policies, or you look at other organizations' policies, they're all pretty much the same because they come from the same kind of mass template that we all use. And I see people smiling, so you all know that this is true. But what we did in this process is we also made sure that that all of our policies have to line up, and people who read them have to be able to understand them. So it has to be applicable for the people who are going to be working there, particularly when 2/3 of your workforce are folks who are coming from lived experience and whose education levels are going to be varying, and who also will not want to read policy until it actually applies to them. This also means that we had to really in this time frame, we were in that opportunity where we were able to look at how hiring was done and understand what types of barriers as organizations do we put in place that makes sense, from a managerial, operational perspective, but actually create a lot of barriers for you to hire the folks that you need to hire. And this is particularly salient with us because as an Indigenous and queer organization, we also want to make sure that the numbers of people that are employed with our agency reflect the community that they're working with. And so if 80% of our people who visit our programs and our staff, if 80% of the people who visit our programs are Indigenous and 60% of the people that visit our programs are queer, then 80% of our staff has to be Indigenous and 60% of our staff have to be queer. And there's no way around it. Absolutely no way around it. And so that's what we have to do. And so to do that, you have to also understand what types of systemic barriers, you have to understand what type of recruitment, what does your recruitment strategy look like, and then how are you doing. And then we had to develop a super democratic hiring process that is convoluted, but that works because it gets people into the doors in ways that in other organizations I've never seen happen. So just to speak on that really quickly, if you are applying for a job at Sunshine House, I will see a committee made up of a director, staff, and a peer are going to review your resume. And then out of the hundreds of resumes that we receive, that group will make recommendations to a committee of people who are going to do the interviewing, but those interviewers will never see the resumes. And we'll tell the applicant that they'll never see the resumes, and then that committee will do the interview and will score based on personality, based on vibe, based on whatever feels right. And then they'll make the recommendations, and then we'll do our, we'll check references, and then that works. And then through there, we've been able to really recruit a team that is really invested into this process. We really had to prioritize lived experience, and so that's one of the ways that we've done it. And then we've also had to be really meaningful in the ways that we define peer engagement, and also allowing peers to be able to move willingly throughout the organization as they see fit. So they can move to be staff, they can move to have a full-time position. It's not rare for us to have a person who works in one of our programs, but also be a housing client and that kind of stuff. So we have to really not be afraid of change, and we have to really have a good relationship with chaos. And we have to understand that we're never going to be able to regulate the environment that we work in because of all of the external factors, but we can ride the waves. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about before I switch over to something else is part of this process is really being intentional about how we're developing programs. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the names of the programs and then give you an overview of kind of how we developed 2SLGBTQIA housing in an environment of chaos, lack of resources, and just sheer will and determination from the team. So Zakituwad is an Anishinaabemoan or an Ojibwe word that is a part of the concept of an individual being able to choose what they love and choose what they want to protect and choose what they want to value. So that was the first word that came to us when we were developing our housing team, and that is how we came to that is the central tenet of housing. Individuals have the right to choose what it is that they want and what they value and what they love. Gijawinimin also comes from another Anishinaabemowin word, another verb, because in Anishinaabemowin we have two verbs that express the condition of love or the emotion of love. One is, Gijawinimin is that deep foundational, it comes from the verb Jawinimin, which is that deep foundational love that we have as individuals that dictates our responsibility to live in this earth in a good way. And so in this particular sense, Gijawinimin means I love you, I value you, I see you, and I respect you. And it's really, really important at Sunshine House that we create a culture where everyone kind of knows what we're doing and knows what it is that's driving what it is that we're doing, so that at least we can always find the same word. And one of the challenges that we know in the sector is that the more words get used, the less value they have. And so we really want to be intentional about that. So through this, we also, as we were developing, it's also really, really important to honor our lineage and our collective history. So Sunshine House itself is named after a Two-Spirit trans person who was working with the organization in the early 2000s, who passed away of AIDS. And then Kelly's Corner, so that's one of the legacies that we inherit and that we have to always value in all of the work that we do. And Kelly's Corner is also named after a Two-Spirit elder who dedicated her entire life, Kelly Houle, to supporting queer, particularly Two-Spirit and non-binary people and trans folks navigate houselessness, the intersections of sex work, the intersections of racism, the intersections of all of those things. And so that is the legacy that we inherited there. And so when we were developing all of our housing programs, those are the people that we're developing it for, and everyone buys in. And these folks here will give me strange looks if I'm not telling the truth. And so far I'm telling the truth. But everyone buys in to understand what it is that we're doing. And so creating a really, really clear type of mission on that is what's really important. Now I'm gonna be done, so if you have any questions about anything I just said, feel free to write it down and we'll talk about it after that, after the presentations. And we're gonna show you a little video kind of about what our housing is. And then it's you, so I'm gonna go sit down.
Hi, my name is Father Wolf. I'm from Muskogum First Nation. I've been at Sunshine House for almost 7 years. The job I currently have is the Director of Community Services. I run programs such as our Zagi 2 program, which helps house queer folks that are dealing with houselessness. I also run the program called Bimosela, which helps queer folks navigate their experiences within the detox and treatment centers. At Sunshine House, we are peer-focused, so a lot of our programs are peer-based. We listen to the people that have lived experience and try to navigate our programming with their lens. The peers that we work with have the ability to tell us what their needs are and how we can meet them. Because people that have lived experience know what they have to deal with on the day-to-day basis and what they need to go through in their daily lives. It's important to listen to people with lived experience because they know what their setbacks are in life, have to navigate the world in a different way. People with lived experience don't get to have the tender care that most people do in society, and they have to do it in a way that's more life-threatening or more dangerous to themselves, and to do it in different ways that could cause harm. You shouldn't treat people that have lived experience like they are not an essential part of what society is. People with lived experience are the most informed, the most trialed, and show the world what needs to happen within our society.
My name's Crowheart. I'm from WGH6 Cree Nation. It's in northern Manitoba. I'm currently the Zagi Systems Navigator for the Zagi housing team. Zagi is the queer-focused housing team here at Sunshine House. It's one of the only few queer-focused housing programs in the country. What I do within the housing team is I'm liaisoning between Anomalous Winnipeg and Sunshine House to kind of oversee HIFIS trainings and HIFIS management and I think data management for that entire system for Sunshine House. Well, from the startup of this program, Zagi Tuwad, we've always had the input from people in the community, like peer advisory circles and town halls, get their input to where we should be going with things, to how intake should work, how language should be used, just to make sure things are safe and not letting them leave like stressed or like triggered after an intake or a meeting with them. You shouldn't leave them feeling like a burden or they're gonna come back and have to repeat their story that they just told you, and just so they feel heard and not like they're just coming to another place where they're not gonna get their needs met.
My name is Henry and I'm 20 years of age. I'm from Nigeria. I'm part of the Geese family. They were the one who referred me to Sunshine House when I was seeking shelter and housing and support system when I arrived in Canada after the traumatic events that happened in Nigeria back home. This family helped me in growing and going into myself and me being free in doing what I'm doing. So I have my feet now, so I'm grateful for that. And also this year, I had a stable job. I have a source of income. I have my own business which is growing, and everything is you guys that helped me. You guys supported. So without you guys, I don't even know how I even stand. So, and I have a new nice apartment where I stay. So that's the best. So that's it. I have confidence now. I can feel it.
Come on, businessman.
A peer is someone who is equal to you, regardless of your culture, your religion, your sexuality, your gender. Everything is just equal to you. He can relate to you. That's what I would describe as a peer. The people that have lived the experience, somebody like me, it's very important to listen to people who have lived your experience because they will teach you everything that they know. You could come to me, I will tell you. I will tell you how it is. If you're a newcomer to Canada, come to Sunshine House. If you're a newcomer and you're a refugee claimant or a queer person, come to Sunshine House and come to the Geese family. They will really help you a lot. I'm a testimony.
Hello, as you can see, I'm obviously not as tall as Levi. My name is Helena. I work at Sunshine House. I originally was born in Ethiopia and my family moved to Kenya for better opportunities. And then I've been living in Winnipeg for over 20 years now. So I am the director of the Gishawinimin Services and Programs at Sunshine House. Like Levi said earlier, we work with folks around their needs regarding sexual health, advocacy, as well as working with queer refugee claimants. In Winnipeg, there are not a lot of organizations who are in this role, and so it's really really exciting to be part of the program. So with the Gishawinimin program, we don't have any housing available to us. What we do is we advocate, we coordinate with folks in community to make sure that they can access the existing resources like New Journey which is an organization that works with newcomers around housing. And we are in our second hiring of a peer right now. So there's been 2 folks who have worked as lived experience experts who are going through the refugee claim themselves as queer individuals. And just last week, we had our second peer in the role go through their hearing process and actually get their status granted. So it's really exciting to be able to work with folks and to see the peers get to experience the joy and the release that they help facilitate for other people, and finding that stability for themselves is really incredible. We really have to be mindful when working with this population about the reality of discrimination and knowing that it's gonna be present. It's just a matter of how familiar you are and how you can equip people to navigate that, because queer folks and refugee claimants, these are populations that have a lot of politicized narratives and rhetoric around them. And so it's our job to make sure that we can provide opportunities like cultural exchange as harm reduction. We are hope facilitators, and we keep people's stamina going. And obviously, when you're dealing with immigration, it's a lot of system navigation, and resettling is a very long experience for folks as well. And when you work with queer refugee claimants, you have to be willing to be flexible, change with the times, and know the context in which that you're operating in. So one of the realities is discrimination, and this is a really prevalent item because in the settlement sector, folks will experience homophobia, and then in queer spaces and facilities, they might experience xenophobia or racism. And so these are the most common forms of discrimination that our community members have reported to us while they're in resettlement. And so you can see that there's a lot of overlapping places, and a lot of the folks that we work with are coming from all over the world. We have folks coming from North Africa, from South Asia. We have folks from South America and Central America as well. And so when you're working with such a wide range of identities, it's really important to remember that people are going to experience discrimination in different ways, and to be able to have those conversations and to be able to adapt to that as well. In regards to the way that classism operates within resettlement, money is a huge, huge component about stability, right? And so how people can access income, how people can get their feet under them is one of the biggest things that we work with folks on when they're resettling. And so one of the biggest things is acknowledging that there's homophobia in the settlement sector, but we work to educate and to inform people on how to improve their access and services for folks working with this population as well. So we want to call people in, we don't want to call people out, and we want to make sure that they understand, there's very few places people can go. So it's really important that they can come to you and feel safe at your services as well. In regards to cultural exchange as harm reduction, this is a real tenet of the way that we operate, because we want to acknowledge that the opportunity for cultural exchange is what builds bridges and what helps people understand the experiences of other folks, especially folks who've experienced colonization in different parts of the world by different entities. There's a lot of overlapping stories and experiences there. And so making sure that we're using the opportunity to provide folks with cultural access and cultural exchange means that we're going to do a better job of building stronger communities. And these communities are going to be able to better rely and collaborate with one another to build mutual respect and understanding. And the goal of all of this is to reduce the occurrence of lateral violence. So lateral violence is the oppression that causes internalized stress and can lead individuals from oppressed groups to direct their frustration at their peers. And this, especially if you're working with folks who feel like resources are sparse and scarce, that anxiety around a limit of resources and who can access them can also make people feel like they can't build bridges across communities. Pace yourselves, right? So it is a long haul journey. We started in about 2017 when we first started working with folks looking for support in the settlement sector. And since 2017, we've worked with about 67 folks who have gone through the settlement process with IRCC and got their status granted as a protected person. And so in the context of how to pace yourself, you have to be aware of the processing delays or the processing wins that are available through the government. So currently right now within the refugee claim stream here in Quebec, there's 53,000 people who are being processed by the government. And across Canada, that is over 100,000 folks, right? So usually the wait time for immigration refugee processing is going to be at least 24 months. And so in that time, people need food, they need to be healthy, they need to be connected to community, they need to be able to express their gender or sexuality in ways that maybe they weren't able to do so when they were living in their home country or through their migration path here, right? And so it is going to be a long, long journey. And the fact that a lot of folks fear in that time while they're waiting to be processed, they worry about accessing services and supports and benefits because in their mind, if they are looking for status here in Canada, they worry that the immigration officer reviewing their case might not consider them as stable enough, right? So if I access EIA, will the immigration officer see that I'm not capable of, building a life for myself independently here in Canada? And so a lot of our folks have to be encouraged to actually utilize the services. And I always tell them, you're already paying taxes. You will be paying your income tax into the EIA system that is there and available for you to be entitled to. So do not worry about being considered ineligible just because you access the services that you are entitled to, right? And a lot of that comes from folks across the world experience social safety nets in their own societies differently, right? Here in Canada, there's certain things that are socialized, there's certain things that are public access, and so understanding where people are coming from and what kind of benefits or social safety networks that were available to them, because if they don't necessarily come from a place where they could access that, that might be a new concept that you want to navigate with them and talk through with them as well. And the public safety net here versus back home is something that you can always talk about, and it really is enlightening to understand the systems in which other people are coming from, and making sure that you are going to maintain your stamina, but you're also going to maintain the stamina of the community member, right? Being honest and truthful of how long things are going to take, and also giving them recreational alternatives to spend that time, right? And when it comes to advocacy, we will provide advocacy via form of hearing support. So that could look like a space to have your hearing, technology, a secure private space to have that conversation with the immigration officer. It could look like a letter of support to acknowledge your engagement with the organization and how long you've been a member of our community, how many events that you've attended, and how strong of a relationship that you've built while you're looking to connect with queer folks in Winnipeg to actually build out that community and that sense of belonging. And so with confidence building, that is one of the things that you can spend the 24 months or longer doing and working on, right? And so as people become more confident, they're going to become more inclined to do self-advocacy, and resettlement time is a time to build that. And as one of our peers in the video said, it's really fun to see people become more confident and to take up more space, especially in the sense of how am I going to express my gender? How am I going to explore my sexuality? Because I had to live clandestinely before. All of my relationships were in secret. I would be risking exposure if I was looking to make a connection, right? And it's really important to be able to identify those strengths they're building in the time that they're with you, and to celebrate, birthdays, milestones, whatever it might be, because social rejection is really hard to go through. And when you find a place where you Perfect. I will. And like I said, so as an organization, we provide people with the skill set to do self-advocacy, but we also always will step in when we're needed. And part of that looks like vetting your partnership. So you really want to make sure that if you're sending folks elsewhere, that you have an understanding of if that place is safe and if they understand how to work with your community members and your population as well. And so being realistic with community members and informing them about their rights, their entitlements, and explaining the next step and responsibilities. Education against assumptions held by some newcomers that public benefits and resources may negatively impact their immigration application as well. And so safety and security are often talked about together when we talk about housing security, the immigration process, queer folks' experience of society. But safety is something that we feel, and security is how we get to that sense of safety, right? And so making sure that you're always checking in with people, because balancing short-term and long-term goals is a really tough challenge, and you want to make sure that the basic needs are being met in that moment, but you're also keeping an eye on the bigger picture at the end of the tunnel, right? What do you want to do when you get your status granted? Are there folks that you want to sponsor once you have your immigration permanent here in Canada? Do you want to go back to school now that you can access, those beautiful, beautiful student loans with not predatory interest rates? And obviously, we are at a time where a lot of attitudes are changing and shifting across the world, but here in Canada as well. And so being mindful that when you are in a precarious immigration status, you are more inclined to be under surveillance as an immigrant or a migrant, and you also might see a little bit more stress around work placements, work permits, renewal of the work permits as well. And your immigration status is going to affect so many different things, and making sure that people understand how they can be empowered to know their rights, but also understanding where that risk might fall. Especially working with newcomers and refugee folks, it's really mindful to remember that their relationship to victimization and crime can be a little bit different than the average person. Over 80% of all hate crimes are reported to be on the basis of ethnicity, race, religion, or sexuality. So really being mindful that folks are being safe and that they can come to you if something does happen, right? We've had community members, experience being blackmailed, for example, as they're trying to navigate the dating experiences here in Canada. And so being mindful that your housing program also accommodates for all of these different things. And we've got a second video here for you to tell you a little bit about the Kelly's Corner initiative as well.
My name is Allie. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I am the manager for Kelly's Corner. I like that Kelly's Corner is just full of queer people who are unafraid of being themselves. I'm a queer person, and I didn't have that growing up, so being in this space and just being able to accept everyone as they are is a really nice thing. I heard about Sunshine House because I was involved in community a lot. A lot of my friends worked at Sunshine House, and a lot of people I was interacting with, so it kind of naturally swallowed my whole life up. Kelly's Corner is a transitional residence for queer people who are exiting encampments with a focus specifically on Indigenous folks. So we help get people back on their feet and get them set up with everything they might need to live independently on their own. This is our home. It's nice to be part of this community. We have big dreams of making it a little bit brighter and a little more queer around here.
And action.
My name is Charles. I'm from Winnipeg. I am a former resident graduate, I guess, of Kelly's Corner. I heard about Sunshine House through, when I was living in encampment, I heard about it through Scott and Cleveland, the people that were staying there, and they connected me to Heather, and they gave me a stable place to to get back on my feet, I guess. Yeah, sure. I don't think I would have been any I wouldn't have made it this far without them, honestly. I didn't have to I don't know, feel judged about anything anything really, and it was honestly, I love everyone there. They're feel like family to me, honestly. I wouldn't have, I say that to Heather all the time. It's like, thank you. Like, you've done so much for me. And like, honestly, like in like the less of a year that I've known you guys, and it's, it's done so much.
So a peer is anyone who either currently or in the past has lived experience with the work that we do. So either lived experience being houseless, lived experience using drugs, lived experience with STBBIs, anything under that umbrella. No matter where they've come from in the world or what their background is, people know themselves and they know what they need. And I think like not getting their information and not having them inform decisions is kind of leaving them out of the programs that are supposed to be for them. It just makes sense to, let the people who need the programs guide the programs.
They know what works. They've gone through it, and like they know what works, and they know what doesn't work. Because it's about the program should be like made by people, not for them. If that makes any sense.
Don't stigmatize people. Don't make them feel less than or less intelligent or less capable because they've been through stuff. Don't make things inaccessible to people just because they don't have the same access that you might. Make things clear, make things legible. Don't use, academic language just for the sake of sounding smart. Like, make people comfortable, make things accessible for people.
I mean, talk down to them, like, act like it's, like, just like judge them, I guess, because it's like, it's like they've gone through it and like they know, it's, just don't talk down to them, because it's like it's lived experience is just as valuable as like work experience. And I hope they all have the the same experience that I had in there, like, it's like, because it's just so much positivity, and like it's really like really nice there, honestly. Like, I hope all of them the best, really.
So I hope you feel like you know a little bit more about Sunshine House and the work that we're doing. As Levi said, we'll be available to answer questions, and I thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gazel Manuel. I am a research officer from EGAL Canada, and today my colleague Linda Gogan Manning could not make it with us, but she is my colleague from Rainbow Veterans Canada, and we are working on this project called Lest We Forget, Raising Awareness on 2SLGBTQI Canadian Veteran Homelessness and Housing Insecurity. So for today's presentation, I'm going to be discussing the preliminary findings of our study. We just finished wrapping up data collection this previous month. We're still kind of recruiting participants, so it's not really that wrapped up. So analysis has not started, so we're just sharing initial observations. So about our organization, it is a joint collaborative effort between EGAL Canada, Canada's leading organization on 2S LGBTQI people and issues focusing on research, education, and legal advocacy to improve the lives of 2S LGBTQI people across Canada. And then Rainbow Veterans Canada is an organization that aims to provide a voice and safe space for 2S LGBTQI veterans and those impacted by the LGBT Purge. Our project is funded by Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada. And I just want to acknowledge the land from which I work. While EGAL Canada is based in Toronto, I currently live in Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1 territory. It's homeland of the Red River Métis, the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Iniwak, and Dakota Oyate peoples. And I'm just going to give you some information and background information about the study. So The 2SLGBTQI Canadian Veteran Homelessness and Housing Insecurity Project is a significant undertaking because it's the first of its kind in Canada that we're aware of. Generally speaking, there's not much research on 2SLGBTQI veteran homelessness, and even in the United States, where the majority of this research has been published. Most literature on veteran homelessness is within the context of the US, so we can get some insights from US studies, but it cannot fully capture the Canadian experience, as there are many differences between the historical and political context of the US military and the Canadian military. In particular, when we're looking at the 2SLGBTQI experience, there is the historical and political context of the Canadian government's LGBT Purge. In Canada, there are few studies that explore veteran homelessness, especially those experiences of marginalized veterans. To my knowledge, the only research studies that focus on marginalized veterans' experiences are those about homelessness with veteran women. And of the studies that do exist in Canada, some have explored the impact of military service on homelessness. And similarly, our study seeks to examine the impact of military service on 2SLGBTQI veterans' experiences with homelessness and housing insecurity. So for the goals of this study, it's to understand the experiences of unhoused and housing insecure 2SLGBTQI Canadian veterans and to identify the unique needs and experiences and challenges of this population. So by conducting this research, our goal is to develop resources, conduct knowledge mobilization through the form of webinars, courses, and to increase awareness about 2SLGBTQI veteran homelessness that could help to inform future policies. As well, with the lack of research on this specific topic, this is foundational research on this population, so we aim to also fill in research gaps on veteran homelessness and 2SLGBTQI homelessness as well. So the methods that we used for this study, so our study is a national scope qualitative research project that's community-based that originally sought to do arts-based qualitative research to explore the experiences of homelessness and housing insecure 2SLGBTQI Canadian veterans, but due to some unforeseen challenges with recruitment and timing, we've had to pivot to conducting only interviews with this population. We use an intersectional and military life course approach and minority stress frameworks when developing our methodological tools, such as interview guides. And for data collection, we conducted it throughout March and to September 2025. I have done one interview the past 2 weeks ago. So, and again, as I mentioned earlier, we're still recruiting stragglers for this project because we didn't have many participants. For the study, we only had 10 participants throughout all the past few months, which we think is because of the photo elicitation component that we originally had in our research plan, which we'd have them take photos based off prompts about how they would define their experiences in the military or being unhoused, what home means to them, and so on. And it was just a lengthier process. And because of the limitations of our team being remote, we couldn't do in-person outreach. And our project was closed recruitment, and we used purposive and snowball sampling. So that just means that we target a specific demographics, that is 2SLGBTQI veterans, and we would also snowball sampling also refers to word of mouth recruitment. So if somebody conducted the study, they would tell their friends, or if they can't participate in the study, they'd still tell somebody that they know. So our participants were mainly recruited through Rainbow Veterans Canada's networks and membership. And they would connect with their membership through email lists or private Facebook groups. We really heavily relied on word of mouth recruitment, as the 2SLGBTQI veteran community is quite small, especially when we are relying on Rainbow Veterans Canada. The reason for closed recruitment was to circumvent issues regarding validating veteran status, which would require going through additional channels and steps to check if they are indeed veterans. As RVC, so Rainbow Veterans Canada, validates veteran status, we would be avoiding potential issues such as fraud or falsification of veteran status. We tried to do open recruitment originally, and we got a lot of spammers and bots and people faking their identity. I had one person that I interviewed on Zoom. They didn't want to be on camera, which was like one red flag already. But then I was asking, what branch of the military are you from? And they were like, I'm from the Marines. It's like, Canada doesn't have a Marine Corps. And it was just like really awkward. So after that, we just relied on closed recruitment at that point, because it's a lot to go through all those spammers and bots. Yeah, we had recruitment posters posted on websites. We tried to do academic email lists, contacting legions. It was just like, there was a lot of people that were not being honest with us, unfortunately. So that's the reason for the small sample size. And just about the participants of the study. So because we are partnered with Rainbow Veterans Canada, a lot of their membership tends to be people who survived the LGBT Purge, which I'll talk about in a minute for those who don't know what that is. So like the sample tends to be very skewed towards a certain demographic, such as those being older adult, like all the participants were over 60 years old. They all survived the LGBT Purge. They were all from the Canadian Armed Forces, different branches such as the Air Force and the Navy, and some reserve and tri-forces. They had joined the military between ages 17 to 22, which is quite young. They graduated just out of high school. And then they're navigating the military life and then being persecuted for their identity. It's a lot. The racial background is 8 white people and 2 Métis. And gender breakdown is we had 1 trans woman, 3 non-binary people, 2 cisgender women, and 4 cisgender men. And in terms of sexual orientation, we had 6 queer identified, 3 gay, and 1 lesbian. And the participants were found through 5 Canadian provinces, and I believe this is also a limitation with Rainbow Veterans Canada's membership. They tend to be skewed towards Ontario and in the Maritime provinces. I don't know why, but that's how it just ended up being. And so specifically, they came from British Columbia, Ontario, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland. And out of the 10 participants, 9 experienced homelessness and housing insecurity, with only 1 having experienced housing insecurity. So just the analysis approach that we're using reflexive thematic analysis. So that method, we would code the data from the interviews into categories, and after coding them, we would examine all the data we have so far to categorize them into overarching themes and look at bigger picture. And as a researcher, I would be taking my own perspectives into account when analyzing the data, identifying any biases, reflecting on my own experiences and assumptions, and how it may influence the interpretation of research data. So I am part of the 2SLGBTQI community. I'm queer, but I'm not a veteran. So my colleague Linda, who's not with us, she is veteran. So I would be asking her for her insight about when I'm analyzing the data, because I don't have the lived experience of being a veteran or being, a purge survivor. And we also use intersectional military life course and minority stress lenses. So for the military life course approach, we look at how the participants' military career and their experiences may have contributed to or led to other events that happen later on in life. So for example, how their military career experience may have led them to events that contributed to them becoming houseless or housing insecure. And minority stress in this study refers to how the unique stressors experienced by the 2SLGBTQI veterans, particularly those stemming from prejudice and discrimination, may have had a negative impact on their mental and physical health and well-being. So again, as we're in the beginning stages of data analysis, for the next part of the presentation, I'll be sharing initial observations because we haven't finished coding yet or doing the themes. And we're dividing them into the categories of risk factors influencing homelessness and housing insecurity, and supportive factors to overcome homelessness and housing insecurity. So before that, we're just gonna give some background and context to the LGBT Purge for those who don't know what that is. So I want to point out how the LGBT Purge underscores all the experiences shared by the research participants in the study, as all the participants were purge survivors. So the LGBT Purge was a state-sanctioned campaign that systematically identified and removed LGBT members from the military, public service, and the RCMP. This has left many victims who survived the purge becoming traumatized and having lifelong consequences, such as having mental health conditions, difficulties securing employment, and difficulties with forming relationships and social connections, as well as difficulties securing housing because of all those other factors. Right? They don't just work in isolation from one another. So we're going to go over the initial research observations of the risk factors. So for the sake of time, I wouldn't be going over all of these. Instead, I'm just going to focus on the two main ones, which is the military career transition to civilian life and the social isolation and lack of social connection. Although it is important to note that gender and sexual orientation-based discrimination and military sexual trauma does play a big role. If I had more time, I would have gone over that. But so the first, I'll discuss military career transition, which relates to discharge status and their reasons for release, which factors to how veterans are able to access services and benefits. And the second is social isolation and lack of support systems, and how that can impact a veteran's ability to form relationships and seek help. So, like previous research suggests, one's experiences with military career transition into civilian life is a critical risk factor, one of the biggest ones, for homelessness among veterans. Unlike other groups of veterans, the LGBT Purge plays a huge role for 2SLGBTQIA veterans' departure from the military into civilian life. So discharge status, such as reason for release, for instance, many of them got the reason for release 5D, not advantageously employed, so they technically get an honorable discharge. But they are put on their file as not advantageously employable. So that means that they won't be able to get a career in the Canadian military or even in, the Canadian military or the RCMP. I think that's a classification for the military though. So even if a lot of them, that's their lifelong dream to be in the military. Many of the participants, that was their calling. They were in the cadets force or their family members were in the military, and that's something that they always envisioned doing, and then all of a sudden, they're cut off from that. So, and they'll never be able to do it again, right? Even like they were purged, I had asked the participants the question, would you serve again if you had the chance, despite all that's happened? And all of them said yes. There's a very contradictory thing with being persecuted by the government, but also having pride in service. Among the participants. So the reason for discharge or release can impact how they access benefits and impacts job prospects, and it also contributes to a sense of shame and social isolation. So I just have a quote here. From Micah, a queer trans woman in her 60s from Nova Scotia who believes that her military career transition experience been different, and had she received proper support in terms of being able to access veteran services and benefits, she would not have experienced homelessness or suffered from psychological issues. So she says, I've been suffering and homeless and all that crap when I didn't have to for all those years. My life would have been completely different. Wouldn't have had been a struggle. I wouldn't have had gone through everything, and I would have had a pension to fall back on. I would have been okay. I would have had psychological support. I didn't know how to deal psychologically with civilian life after dealing with all that crap. So just some context for Micah here. She was discharged and she wasn't able to access her veteran benefits. She had PTSD, but didn't know that for years. She also transitioned during that period where she was homeless, and she also got cancer and a bunch of other health conditions, and she didn't have any access to help or supports or a medical pension from serving the military. And she was one of the few members of the military that had served beyond 3 years. So that was really devastating financially for her. She had to sell all her belongings. She lived on the streets, lived in the car. So yeah, had she known about that, because at the moment, Veteran Affairs, who would be the ones dispersing benefits, it would be up to the service members and veterans to contact them, to contact VAC to receive the supports, contact a veterans advocate. It wouldn't be VAC contacting them. And she didn't have any knowledge of those resources or supports. So events from the military transition to civilian life is a known risk factor. Again, I mentioned one of the most significant ones. And veterans report not receiving enough support from the military. This is true in research, but this is also true in the interview data. In the 80s and 90s, when the participants were serving and had left the military, they received no supports. They shared that they were just told that they had to leave, and it was very traumatizing for some of them. Some of them experienced verbal abuse, such as being called a disgrace. I'm not going to repeat any of some slurs, but you can probably imagine some of the words they've been called. And several mentioned that upon discharge, they were never to be considered a veteran due to their sexual orientation. And previously, in order for veterans to be considered, service members to be considered a veteran, they have had to have served a certain number of years. I believe it was about 3 years. That's changed now, but in the past, that would contribute to issues being able to access benefits. And the psychological and emotional toll of being abruptly purged from the military contributes to a sense of shame. With the culture of stoicism and self-reliance in the military, many felt that they could not seek help or felt ashamed in doing so. So the next section is about social isolation and lack of social connection. So here's a quote from Esther, who is a queer person from Ontario in her 60s. I had absolutely no help, no support, nothing. And I wasn't going home because I already felt enough shame. I couldn't face my mom saying, oh, by the way, I got kicked out of the military and I don't know why, and now I'm homeless, right? I just couldn't do it. Purge survivors have many unique stressors, such as being in the closet or having to be constantly on guard, and the inability to trust others. As well, many report having experienced military sexual trauma, and how this manifested differed for men and women. So for men, it would be more like making fun of the way they act, or how they don't get women, or their proximity to femininity. Whereas for women, it would be similar in terms of, if they don't date men or anything like that, or they hang around women too much, or even if they play softball. I do know of women who were purged. They weren't even queer or part of the 2SLGBTQIA community, but they just played softball, and they got targeted for being a lesbian because of that. As well, rejecting romantic. Several women in the study had noted that one way that lesbian identity was weaponized against them was that if they rejected romantic advances from other men in the military. So if they didn't say yes, they didn't want to sleep with them or date them, they would be threatened to being reported for being a lesbian. So that's in those ways, that's how it differed. So there is shame from being purged. Some did not disclose to friends and family about the circumstances of leaving the military, like Esther had mentioned in the quote previously. They were too ashamed to tell them why they were discharged, especially those who, there was their lifelong dream to be in the military. They were so keen on being there, and all of a sudden they're not working there anymore, and then they can't even share why. It's incredibly isolating. So when people talk about the military, or when veterans talk about the military, one of the positive aspects of it is having a sense of camaraderie, a sense of siblinghood. I don't want to use brotherhood or sisterhood here, but the camaraderie among other veterans. But for purge survivors, there is that contradiction. Some of them do feel that, but it's also like they don't feel that sense of camaraderie, especially while they were serving. Because during the purge, it was encouraged for service members to report anyone who they suspect is LGBT. So as I mentioned, some of that was weaponized could be used for blackmail and other reasons. So the participants had noted living under constant suspicion. It was difficult for many of them to form connections and friendships with others. Being able to form communities among other LGBTQI members in the military was not possible either, due to fears of being exposed and then subsequently purged. So LGBTQI people and straight people played into the homophobic, transphobic, and misogynistic culture of the military in order to ward off any suspicion directed towards them. So it's also this element of self-loathing, because they're kind of it's like promoting lateral violence among people like them, right? So during the purge, the culture of lateral violence among queer people was reported by many participants. Even if other people had disclosed to them personally that they identified as LGBT, it doesn't stop them from reporting each other to one another in order to save their careers. That's just how the environment was back then. It was either you play into this system or you lose your livelihood. So several participants, a few of them had shared that they felt that they were personally betrayed by romantic partners that they had formed during their military service or other LGBT people that they had confided to. So that creates a lot of stress and trust issues. So a quote again from Esther. She says, "What do I still carry today? Shame, loneliness, a lack of trust, lack of relationship. Because who do I trust to be in one? So I just locked myself up emotionally, physically, and spiritually." So related to that, there is an impact on forming romantic relationships and partnerships. So one of the supporting factors for leaving homelessness and housing insecurity is, having a dual income household. So romantic relationships can provide emotional and financial support that positively impacts one's housing status. So the trauma from the purge has prevented several participants in the study that I've interviewed to be able to form close bonds and relationships with others. Some of them is like lifelong. So I have another excerpt here from Curtis, a gay man in his 60s from British Columbia. He says, "It's called internalized homophobia. It's a pathological disorder, and it robs you both of energy and mental power and stamina and self-esteem, and the ability to build associations and relationships and so forth. You haven't asked me, but I'll tell you, I've never had a relationship since 1982. I don't know how to do them." So now we're just going to go to the second part of the initial research observations, which is the supportive factors to overcome homelessness and housing insecurity. So these are some of the initial findings. So the things that we found common throughout the interview themes were mutual aid and support, receiving mutual aid and support from the LGBTQI community, the impact of having romantic or domestic partnerships on finances, so again, having a dual income household, financial windfall, so having sudden access to large sums of money, so it could either be obtained through back pay from pensions or medical pensions benefits, or it could be payouts from Veteran Affairs Canada, class action lawsuits, because there was a purge class action lawsuit that happened nearly 10 years ago. From a formal apology from the government, sorry, but the purge class action lawsuit was filed in 1992. And support from family members. So due to the sake of time, I'm just going to cover the aspect of mutual aid and support from the LGBT community and financial windfalls, as these are factors that are specifically unique to the 2SLGBTQI veteran community. So 9 out of 10 participants who received support and mutual aid from a member of the 2SLGBTQI community. So that's people from outside the military. Like sometime in their lives, it was somebody who was queer or 2SLGBTQI. So mutual aid came in the form of having a place to stay, sometimes with no cost to low cost rent, often couch surfing until they attain financial stability and ability to move out on their own. So all the participants in my study had never stayed in a shelter due to safety concerns. So they had the support of the queer community to help them as they navigate this difficult time in their life. As well, they got assistance in being able to navigate social services and accessing benefits, such as being able to sign up for welfare and veterans pensions. I was told by several veterans that going through all these paperworks, going through formal government processes is incredibly traumatizing and stressful given what happened to them in the purge. So having somebody there to help them navigate that was super helpful. And also, in the form of networking, such as finding leads on 2S LGBTQI friendly housing or finding leads on employment. So I do remember this one participant that due to his connection with the queer community, they wanted to move to Toronto for better job prospects. They knew other queer folk that could house them while they navigate the job market in Toronto. And the second part is financial windfalls. So, as I previously mentioned, receiving large sums of money, inheriting property or assets as a factor to overcoming homelessness. So, circumstances such as receiving lump sum payments from VAC or the government, the class action lawsuit, and inheritance were ways for participants to afford housing and achieve stability. Although, not that this is like part of the financial windfalls aspect, but just to cover the support from family, for example. They did receive financial support from family, but they also got to live on their property as well. So that's like one way that they're able to achieve support in that way. So I don't have a slide for this part, but I just want to mention that in terms of what suggestions could be done, so like many of you here are from nonprofit organizations or other housing or like poverty reduction organizations, what can be done in terms of supporting the 2SLGBTQI veteran population is to increase initiatives that support educating service providers about the specific and unique experiences of 2SLGBTQI veterans, especially Purge survivors, because they mentioned that there's not much education on that, right? Not every veteran's experience is gonna be the same. Not every like 2SLGBTQI person's experiences with homelessness and housing insecurity is going to be the same. And they also report not being able to receive tailored help and just feeling unsupported by service providers and from VAC, which is not unique to this population. But, and there are little to no supports in place that specifically target the needs of 2SLGBTQI veterans or like really take seriously their experiences. So for the next steps of this project is to complete our data analysis phase and also really wrap up data collection. We're still looking for participants, by the way. If you know anybody that meets the criteria, please send them my way. Because we'd like more than just 10. And we'll be presenting more detailed observations on our November 6th webinar on EGAL's website. There's a QR code in the next slide, so if you want to follow up with that, please feel free to do so. And a more detailed report of the final research findings will be published in spring 2026. Thank you, everybody, and use the QR code to stay updated on the project. Thanks.
Oh, there we go. Can we give another round of applause for all of our presenters today? Thank you so much. So we have time for questions. Yes, perfect.
Thank you to both presentations on the panel. I learned a lot from both. There was my question is actually for Sunshine House. There was a line that Levi said that really stuck with me that I loved was recreation as a form of reduction. What advice do you have for those of us who are looking to incorporate recreation within our services to better support the communities we serve? And what has worked or not worked for you folks?
So advice, I'm terrible at advice. It's the reason I'm the executive director and not a case manager. But I think the advice is really making sure that you have a good relationship with the folks that you're doing, but you also create space for that to happen. And so a good example of this is through our drop-in programs. And so our drop-in always had things happening in it prior to the pandemic. And so you would walk in and you would find people, they would just be doing, they'd be playing music, they'd be doing bingo, they'd be doing that kind of stuff. And then during the pandemic, everything kind of had to change. And then as we've emerged out, it was very hard to us to find that balance because when we used to have maybe 20 people come in 2.5 hours, we were seeing 110 people come in an hour. And so how do you create a space for that? And so it really took a lot of work and being really, really intentional about what that means, but also just thinking about recreation is is not necessarily just really expanding your definition and being broad in your scope. And so every day in our drop-in program, now we have the first 2 hours are dedicated to whatever. And so sometimes that can look like having a person come in and doing some fiddling music. Sometimes it'll be like drumming, but a lot of the times it's just like sitting around and coloring with one another and just like talking to people and doing that kind of stuff. And just making sure that everyone kind of has that opportunity within that space and having a space that's conducive to that. You can't actually, it works in our space as you saw because it doesn't feel clinical, but so it's really, really difficult for folks to recognize your own limitations, what you can do, and then applying that to what it is. I hope that helps.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll go here and then Arlene.
Hi, great presentations as well. I'm John. I do some research on homelessness among 2SLGBTQ+ adults, so it's cool to see a housing program for those folks. I know you don't like to give advice, but I have another question asking for advice. It sounds like you intentionally led with like intersectionality. You're not just a queer and trans program, you're like a program for everybody, right? So what advice do you have for other like queer and trans programs that maybe aren't as intersectional? And what about mainstream programs that want to get into this space as well? Any learnings or advice?
So one of the central teachings that we do comes from the area that I come from, and there's this belief I find in the sector that people need to do everything. And so one of the things that we continually reiterate to our teams, oh, that's some video behind me. I'm like, am I echoing? Is you can't be everything for everyone, because the minute you try to be everything for everyone, you're nothing for nobody. And so that's the thing that our grandmothers always imparted with us when we're doing this type of work. And so the advice I give is really, really, for any organization, is to really, really be intentional and define what it is that you're trying to do. So that's like the key ingredient, is just being, and you always have to kind of hit home and you become a broken record, like, this is what we're doing, this is not what we do. This is what we're doing, this is not what we do. And then understanding that secondary and tertiary supports don't necessarily have to exist within, and it's actually really, really important for all ecosystems to be diverse and to have a multiple ways so that people can engage in it. That's my advice.
I would add, being able to have those services and resources available regardless of who is staffing that organization or that program is really important, so that that longevity of the service can exist for the community. And I'd also say similarly, if you build your services in mind of the most vulnerable people, then everybody in that demographic will benefit from those services. And so making your safety net or your services tailored to the folks who are most marginalized, and then everybody in that pool will benefit from that as well.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for the focus on lived expertise and for recognizing that to the outside people, it looks a little crazy. And we ran a peer shelter for decades, and we were always compared to those nice, well-run, structured shelters that had all the policies, clearly laid out and real down pat. And so I really appreciate that lived experts are being valued now, and the diversity of that. And what do you call that? Oh, there was another thing that you talked about that was important. The other thing I would say, which is not very popular, is that from my perspective as a 70-year-old who's worked in the sector for 50 years, mainstream shelters cannot move into that space because they don't have the mentality, in my mind. The other thing I would say is that working in Indigenous communities and in the North forever, because they think about people, not programs, everything is intersectional. Everything matters. And so, going back to those roots and teachings of the grandmothers and grandfathers is where you end up with a full-fledged kind of programming that meets the needs of people because they're first. Merci. Thank you.
Are there any other questions in the room?
Dramatic pause between questions. Hi, I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to put it out there in fragments if that's okay. Okay, thank you. And thank you for everyone. So you spoke about the intake process, so I'm curious to see like how does the intake process look to transitional housing, and what does it consist of? How long does it take? What would be categorized as a not a good fit? Based on your experience. That's one part. The other one is connected also to, I would say, intake process, but also other services is how do you track data in the database if you have, I'm guessing you have a database, with legal names versus preferred names, because I find it horrible. Also, yeah, I'll return to other questions if I can later on, but these two are at the top of the list for now.
So for our intake process, folks can present at the organization and request housing supports and services. If they're queer, then we would look to connect them with the Zagatuad team in-house. And then we would, any external referrals, we try our best to give an answer within 72 hours of that application being received from the referral agency. And then a lot of folks are connecting with Sunshine House because they don't necessarily have access to services elsewhere. And so we don't believe in like restricting or banning folks for a lifetime. We really try to work our way through a restorative process. And so for us, there is no person who is the wrong fit, I think I could say. It's just a matter of whether or not they're wanting the services that we have within the capacity that we can offer them. And then if it's not the right time, then they can always come back and we can have that conversation again. But I'll let Levi take on the others.
I'm going to contradict what Helena said. There is actually lots of opportunities where people aren't a right fit, and we have to be realistic about that. When we're talking about our intake process, there's two things that I think is really, really integral to the way that makes our team a little bit different than maybe other places, is that from that deep relational foundation that we have, is that if we open that relationship is sacred, and we have to honor that in every way. And so if we do an intake with somebody, even if that person is not a fit, it is our responsibility to hold their bags until we get them to their next place. And so that is really, really, really important. So Feather and her team have been really, really intentional about how we do intakes into programs. And we have a diverse enough array that we often can find somewhere for somebody to go, even just temporarily. But if we find that a person may not be able to come to Sunshine House because they dated one of the workers, because it's a queer community, then maybe we can refer them to one of our partner agencies over at West Central Women's or North End Women's Center or something like that, because that's the real reality of working in queer community. I did write down your questions. I also want to just talk about, I do want to mention a little bit, because I'm really, really proud of the work about our intake process. And so Helena was really, really, like our entire team was really, really instrumental in developing a whole new intake process so that we didn't have several, and so that we can do something that honors and values that relationship. And so we do an activity that was modified from an organization in Brandon called Holding Stones, and it's a very, very intensive process, and we just unveiled that very recently. But it is all founded on that belief that if we're opening up this space for a person to kind of tell us their story, they will never have to retell that story to us, but it's also going to get us all of that information that we need to do all of that back-end stuff. So Crow and our intake coordinator worked with caseworkers and worked with Feather and worked with Helena and Heather, our cultural team, to have a very comprehensive process so that when we get all of those notes back from that hour and a half, 2-hour conversation, now that person can be internally referred whenever they're ready to all of the programs that exist within Sunshine House, whether that be gender-based violence, whether that be detox and the Moseda program, whether that be housing, whether that be wherever, but it's also going into HIFIS, it's also going into all of our other stuff. And in terms of the names and preferred and legal names, if we have to use a legal name in the database, that's fine. But I found that with a lot of the changes in HIFIS, that's only something we have to do, and we never have to actually bring up with that person after we've kind of done that initial intake. And we would never in any kind of internal documentation do we refer to anybody with any kind of dead name or anything like that. And when a person does present and they've done that intake process and they're sitting down with Helena and the other auntie who's doing that intake, they can say, oh, if you would prefer, we can refer you to Mui, who can help you do your name change and do all of that stuff for you, so that you never have to go through this again where an organization has to dead name you.
More questions?
Hi. So I'm not entirely sure how to ask this, but I was wondering, it's kind of related to what you were just talking about with intake and names and stuff like that. But thinking about the ways that particularly funders have requirements around like high levels of surveillance and stuff like that, and when you're working with particularly vulnerable populations, like how do you navigate where you receive funding from based on the funding requirements that require like a high level of tracking that might be a barrier to some people?
In a word, we cook the books. We're very, very honest and open about how we're not going to do that with funders. So particularly with our overdose prevention site, that's always a bone of contention in that the Health Canada really requires you to have a number of different, they want an intake anytime someone's kind of coming to use those services. And because it's a peer-led service, we're not going to do that. So you're going to meet us halfway on this, or else this service isn't going to exist. So what are you going to do? And so we just always flip it back onto them, and it's worked out by and large pretty good. And then when it doesn't, we have, because of the relationships that we have with the community, when we're in a pinch and we're in a bind and a funder is requiring all this stuff, we can quickly mobilize and ask the community to help us fill the gaps. So if we needed to for example, one of the things is like, okay, you've had 111,000 visits in this year. What is your unique visit count? I don't know. I have no freaking idea. But what I can do is I can have Vince here go and sit down in our drop-in and do random surveys with people, give them gift cards, give them money, and then we can kind of make it up. And you know what? And are they going to come down and sit in Sunshine House and then be like, that's correct? No, they're not. They just want something to fill a file that they're never going to open again anyways. So cook the books.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
That was fierce. So I have one more question around facilitation of partnerships, but also, okay, I'm gonna focus more, sorry, I'm an immigrant, so my English turns off around lunchtime. So the first, when I came to the program that I'm managing, there was no connection with family at all, or any kinds of connection with, let's say, siblings at least, or cousins, which brought to the spectrum of like isolation, deeper one. Mental health issues, of course, within the family and everything else, but mostly the youth that we serve are there because they got kicked out from their family home. And there's nothing that, there's no work happening behind the screens with the family, although we're expected to facilitate coming back to the families and connections to be revived. But as we know, that's, well, as I know from my personal experience, that's I was lucky. So do you communicate to any kinds of, like, do you have a networking system that works with family members that are willing to work on their own, like, knowledge level around well, anything basically right now. It's 2025. Or do you do any kinds of work with family members? Like I'm talking about bio families.
So the families that do come through our door are often very supportive. I'll start off with those first because a lot of youth who are non-binary, genderqueer, whatever it might be, their parents will look for the resources and come to Sunshine House. And it's really interesting to sit with a parent who is actively trying to navigate the correct pronouns for their child, whereas I've met the child for the first time and I'm able to, communicate in the preferred pronoun that they have, because for me, I don't have that familial relationship and I'm not working my brain, right? So for youth entering the Sunshine House facility, we ask that folks are 16 years old if they're going to be by themselves. And then if they're younger than that, then we just ask that they have a guardian to make sure that they can remain safe, because our doors are open to everybody. And so we have a lot of parents who are actively working on themselves and their family relationships and those bonds in the drop-in space by going to like that, by coming to our queer bingo fundraisers, and having that immersive opportunity to actually get to understand the queer experience a little bit more. And then outside of that, I don't necessarily say we have families who are coming in to educate themselves. It's a lot of folks who experience that family rejection coming in and building new familial bonds within the folks that are in that space who might have more empathy or understanding of the experiences they're going through. And I think for queer people, we really like to emphasize the concept of chosen family. And so I think that is probably more so what we experience and more so what we're able to foster.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Another round of applause for our amazing presenters.